So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Today we have another multi-chain session. We have a really cool team with us today. If I'm not mistaken, we have Anna, Devin, and Nuno, which are all part of the Centrifuge team. So guys, if you want to unmute yourself and say hi to everyone who's joined.
Yeah,
Hi,
sure.
everyone.
Hello there. Go, Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I'm a product manager at Centrifuge, and I'm really looking forward to this cross-chain Twitter space. Super cool that two projects work together and that we can finally share a little bit of work that we've been doing. So now I hand over to Nuno.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm Nuno. I'm a protocol engineer slash cross-chain engineer. Yeah, it's pretty cool to be part of this. It's been really sincerely a pleasure to work with Moonbeam. Yeah, so it's pretty cool to share a little bit to the rest of the world what we are doing together.
Hi everyone, I'm Devin. I work across marketing and social for Centrifuge. I'm super happy to be here. I'm really excited to tell you all about what we've been working on to connect real-world assets to Moonbeam.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks. It has also been a pleasure. Yeah, Nuno and I have worked quite a lot the last probably months, doing all these multi-chain stuff. So it's really cool to be able to tell the world a story, right? And so, I mean, one thing that I really love about Twitter Spaces instead of presentations is that it's a lot more informal. So if you guys, have a beer nearby or anything, you just, crack them open, and we can get this conversation rolling instead of being more formal events. So, I really love Twitter Space. You don't even have to shave or anything, it's just like super informal. So cool. All right, if I didn't present myself, sorry about that. I am Alberto. I work at developer relations, but I also do a lot of, XCM related stuff, interoperability, connected contracts. This is one of the things that we call connected contracts. I think in the space, you never do one thing, you probably do 10 or 12. So, it's part of being sort of in the blockchain world. So, yeah, so the idea today is sort of to, like we said before, tell the world a little bit of sort of what we've worked with a Centrifuge. We've done a lot of work into actually doing remote EVM calls. So this is when from another parachain like Centrifuge, you're calling the EVM that Moonbeam provides, right? Which is super exciting because I think it's one of these first ever sort of things that have happened in the Polkadot ecosystem. But before we start going into like the technical, like not technical, but more sort of in-depth details about that, let's do an introduction, right? I mean, for the people that don't know, like what is Centrifuge? Very high level. What you guys are doing, and what do you bring into the blockchain world?
Cool, I can take this one. So Centrifuge is essentially an on-chain securitization protocol. We're the first to bring real-world assets on-chain with MakerDAO and Aave, and our vision is to bring the whole world of credit from the real world onto the blockchain. So that's going to bring economic value from the real world, of which there is plenty, into the DeFi ecosystem, and we think that's going to really increase mass adoption. What we're really working towards is providing increased access to capital for small and medium-sized businesses, which is something that traditionally the huge institutions of the world are underserving. And we're also providing institutional lenders, DeFi protocols, individual lenders, a stable and diversified source of Web3 yield that's uncorrelated to the volatility we all know from the crypto markets. That's because the yield is coming from real-world assets. So that's things like invoices, real estate, from the real world instead of crypto assets. And we think this is a really compelling narrative, as real-world asset growth has actually outpaced DeFi. If you compare our TVL versus the rather volatile DeFi TVL through the past year or so. So in a nutshell, we're bringing this entire credit ecosystem from the real world, which is measured in trillions, and bringing it on-chain, and we're both working on all of the protocol level infrastructure, but also on things like, how governance works for this, how privacy works, how the legal setup works, and how we integrate, across the whole ecosystem, which of course includes Moonbeam. So yeah, that's Centrifuge in a nutshell.
Cool, thanks. I do see, anyone wanted to add anything, or? I mean, I think the explanation was really cool and really clear. So So yeah, I want to say hi to everyone that joined recently. I do see some familiar people. We have Sean Trabisi from Parity. So I mean, if we're gonna talk XCM, we have to be sharp because I mean, he's gonna call us out if we make any mistakes.
Yeah,
So
we are screwed. Yeah.
yeah, I know. All right. So I guess you mentioned already a little bit, Devin, but why? Tell us a little bit of the history and what inspired you guys to build Centrifuge, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you guys are trying to build sort of like bring real world assets into the blockchain, but you saw probably that was something that there was a lot of demand.
So I can dive a little bit deeper here. So believe it or not, Centrifuge started in 2018. So, but it didn't start with the tagline financing real world assets. In the beginning, they wanted to build a protocol that supports supply chain financing. And one of the first use cases they also showed at a DeFi conference in London was music streaming. So royalties and how Centrifuge can provide income to musicians and artists because Spotify pays 2 years after someone played their track. So that was one of the first use cases, and from there it just developed into more borrowing money, lending money to SMEs, and then through factoring by tokenizing invoices. And so for all non-finance people, factoring is a type of finance in which business sell their invoices to a third party, so then they can borrow money to meet their short-term liquidity needs. And then over time, I think that was in 2019, the music streaming and supply chain financing. Centrifuge built their first product called Tin Lake on Ethereum, where they opened up pools for different businesses. So a business could open up a pool and then they could tokenize their invoices and assets, and then they use it as collateral. And for that, they were able to borrow DAI. And the first one opened in October 2020. And that was Console Freight, and they're still on the platform, and they are a trade finance and factoring provider. So yeah, that was the story, and then over time more pools were added to the platform, and I think by now we have like 11 live pools. We're working on the new product on the Centrifuge chain, and now we want to bring the whole credit in the world on chain. So this is the story around Centrifuge.
I think I've probably seen Cassidy's presentation. I mean, she has done similar presentations to different events, but I think I've seen that quite a few times when I was like trying to understand Centrifuge, and yeah, it's a really cool story. And you guys, like you said, right? I mean, you guys started on Ethereum, but you are moving to well, you're actually a Polkadot Parachain, right? And so, why did you shift it towards being on Ethereum to becoming a parachain on the Polkadot ecosystem?
So yeah, back in the days, Ethereum was the safe bet, right? That the one that you go for, and it worked well because we had also we just closed the partnership with MakerDAO, so we were able to use their stablecoin DAI for the platform, and it just worked. But then over time, it just got really expensive as well for the different transactions on the platform. And then also in terms of scalability, we had to find a different solution. So then we decided to go for Polkadot and building a parachain and or becoming a parachain. And just because the benefits outweigh, you have like lower transaction fees. We can have an even more flexible loan model than we have now, and also in terms of like adapting to the credit market that's currently off chain, it gives us just so much more flexibility to be on Centrifuge Chain in the Polkadot ecosystem. Yeah.
Definitely. And one thing I like to add here that I've noticed is part of that greater scalability comes from the fact that, we're building the chain from the ground up. Our engineers can actually build our protocol from a very base level, and real-world asset pools on Tin Lake with Ethereum are pretty complicated. There's a lot of smart contracts that have to be deployed, and a lot of smart contracts that talk to each other, and overall makes starting a pool involve a lot of dev time. Whereas with Polkadot, I've seen, creating a pool is as simple as putting in a transaction that creates the pool, and you give all the parameters you want, and so on and so forth. So it's really cool to see how, if we break out of the limitations, just on Ethereum, what we can do and what we can make possible.
Yeah, I think the beauty and the complexity of well, not Polkadot, but a substrate-based chain is that you can modify it as you wish, right? And have the particular functionalities that you've developed to make whatever you do, right, whatever your parachain does, very good at, right? And so I go into the Centrifuge chain and Polkadot, and I would have no clue about all the palettes that you guys have implemented, because probably a lot of them are we've not implemented in Moonbeam. So I think that's part of the beauty of a substrate-based chain. So
definitely,
cool.
Definitely, yeah. There's a lot of custom stuff that I've seen poking through the code. That's fascinating to see how it's being built.
Yeah, that's it. That's the beauty of it, right? And then when Nuno asks stuff about our implementations on Moonbeam, for me it's all like, oh, this is so obvious because I've worked with it every single day, right? But if I go to Centrifuge, I'll probably be bothering Nuno every single minute because it's so different, right? The implementations of each parachain are so different at the end. So I think that's part of it, and that's part of what makes sort of substrate-based chains so interesting at the end. So I guess you guys introduced the idea of centrifuge connectors. I was trying to think about the name. The centrifuge connectors, I think it was a couple of months ago already, and even a little bit longer, 3 months ago, right? Can you, it's sort of at a high level, explain what is the idea of centrifuge connectors, and what would be Moonbeam's role in sort of this idea?
Yeah, I can jump in. So actually, on the name connectors, it took us a while to decide on a good name, because it's so. How do you name your cross chain product? But in essence, it's so if you are a business on Centrifuge, and you have a pool, and you originate loans, and you tokenize your assets, you are on the Centrifuge chain. And then when you tokenize your invoice, you also have a senior pool and a junior pool, so kind of two different tokens. And what we're currently so what connectors is connectors allows then investors. So you have the businesses who need the money, then you have the investors who provide the liquidity. But then connectors allows the investors to provide the liquidity into the different centrifuge pools, so to the different businesses, without having to bridge over to Centrifuge Chain. So let's say you want to support real world assets, but you don't want to come all the way to Centrifuge Chain, you bridge your assets. It just gives you a more native experience on any other chains. And that's why we're working together with you guys, with Moonbeam, and also with XLR as the underlying infrastructure, to bridge to these different EVM chains, while we use XCM to connect to Moonbeam. Maybe we need to explain this a little bit more in detail, because this is really cool that this actually works. So maybe Nuno can give a bit more details how.
Yeah, sure.
How you built it.
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good explanation so far. I think the overarching theme here is that we don't want to force investors to to be stuck on our chain in order to to invest, and to broaden the liquidity source. So the idea is to basically make Centrifuge Chain and make pools accessible throughout networks and throughout environments, So not just on we don't want people to just be able to invest in our pools directly on the Centrifuge chain on Polkadot, but to be able to do that from like Ethereum. So then in the end, connectors is just the like the infrastructure or like the functionality or missing a better term here, but it's just the way we've designed this in order to create a seamless experience for users and for investors to be able to do this from their environment, right, wherever they are. And then indeed we use XCM for some of that stuff. So one of the use cases we can jump into is the specific use case we are building with Moonbeam, where the idea is that this will be bidirectional, but I'm just going to explain the first proof of concept we are working on, where we are building a substrate-based palette on Centrifuge Chain. And what this palette is going to do is basically going to allow us to send a message that's going to targeting our connectors XCM router that's deployed on Moonbeam. So the way this works is like quite a nested thing. So we send an XCM message from Centrifuge to Moonbeam. And this message basically says, oh, can you please execute this call on Moonbeam? And this call basically is a transaction that's specifically for Moonbeam. It basically requests to execute a Ethereum XCM palette transact call, which in turn asks to execute a specific function of our contract on Ethereum or on the contract or the XCM router contract. So basically we are able to send messages cross chain and cross environment, cross network. And this the underlying message is what we call a connectors message. So which is like, for now, the list is like add pool, add tranche, transfer, like update member lists. So like to add investors and so on. So we are able to send these messages through Moonbeam onto the EVM contracts we have deployed there. In a very seamless way through XCM. So I think maybe I went into too much detail, but I hope I gave an idea at least.
Yeah, so let's try to scope it out, right? So at the beginning, the idea is that you want the sort of like execution of everything to happen on Centrifuge, right? Because that's where it is most efficient, I guess.
Exactly.
But then you want other parts of the logic and liquidity to come from everywhere in the blockchain world, right? And so that is why you basically need the connectors, right? Because that's what allows you to keep the execution of your logic on the Centrifuge chain, but then be able to communicate with the other parts of the blockchain world, let's call it like that, because it's not only I guess it's not only within the Polkadot ecosystem, right? It will also be Ethereum, and it might be Avalanche, and it might be other chains as well.
Exactly.
And so in the case of Moonbeam, I guess what we've been working on in the past months has been a way for Centrifuge to call smart contracts that are living in our EVM, so in our Ethereum virtual machine, but these calls are being done in a trustless manner from Centrifuge, from the Centrifuge chain to another blockchain. You're being able to call your smart contracts that you have deployed on Moonbeam with XCM, right? And that, I think that is the cool part of this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the calls that you guys are doing, are these calls that end users are doing, or they will be done by like the Centrifuge Parachain itself from Centrifuge to Moonbeam?
Yeah, so some of the calls, don't necessarily have any authentication requirements. So, like for example, adding a pool onto, like, let's say we want to update state on another environment to say, oh, there is this pool that's open, that's created. Doing such a call doesn't necessarily require any authentication. So like if any end user wants to make this call and like propagate this information or this state onto another, what we call a domain, in this case, like for us, Moonbeam is one of the domains. And as you said, like Avalanche or Ethereum could be other two. Yeah, like for those specific calls, like an end user could call those transactions and like start propagating those messages. Yeah, so they will be able to call it, and that will trigger that XCM message that will send the connector's message onto the contract on Moonbeam. The user will be paying for the fees, involved in that call. Yeah, the sweet thing is that the call will always be, yeah, it will always be like, let me find the right word, but so a requirement for us on the contract side, in this case on Moonbeam, is to make sure that the call has come from Centrifuge, right? So we don't want to be processing connectors messages that may have come from somewhere else, right? Like we don't want, like, for example, Akala or Falo, whatever, any other parachain, to be able to send these messages to our contract on Moonbeam. So we need to verify that the messages have come from Centrifuge. So we do have that, like, authentication there. But yeah, on the Centrifuge side, then some of the calls could be called by any end user. Other calls, they just can only be done by specific people, right? Like, for example, if you are transferring a trench token, then of course it can only be done by the owner of the trench token. Yeah, that sort of logic is in place. Yeah.
Cool. That's really cool. Yeah, and I think one of the cool things about us working together has been that we launched the possibility of calling our EVM through XCM actually quite recently on Moonbase Alpha. I think it has not. No, yeah, it's been over 2 months. I think it's just time flies. Like time goes so by so fast in the space that it's crazy. Yeah, but probably like 3 months ago is that when we launched this possibility to call our EVM through XCM, and this is still POC. This is something that we're thinking about moving to production, but not current, like not recent. It will be done probably later in the year. I would probably shoot myself in the foot if I say any dates, so I prefer not to. But I mean, it has been a fun experience because it has been a learning experience not only for you guys but for us as well, right? I mean, because when you have something but it's not really tested with like this real world scenarios, like you guys are testing it out, it's not really helpful. At the end, oh yeah, we can do a simple hello world example, it works great, right? But when you have sort of more complex scenarios being used, it's where you actually get sort of the POC battle tested, right? And I think it has been very fruitful for us to be able to have this partnership with you guys and have you guys sort of like start testing this like remote EVM calls through XCM, which has been sort of like really, really interesting and really amazing to see. So yeah, I mean, another interesting thing would be through Centrifuge connectors. How, for example, are you planning to bring liquidity to Centrifuge Chain, right? Because I mean, I think if you read about the connectors, some of this like methods that you've detailed actually don't really have sort of like you guys don't have an EVM, right? And so the idea would be, how are you planning to bring liquidity to Centrifuge?
I mean, yeah, maybe I can answer that. So our more short-term plan for bringing liquidity, we are, well, I mean, yeah, so our plan right now, like I would say our most pragmatic plan is to support supports XC USDC. So USDC that's going to be bridged from XLR. In this case, like this bridging will happen through Moonbeam. So like, yeah, we already have in place this this process to open HRNT channels with Moonbeam, so between Centrifuge and Moonbeam. Yeah, so the idea will be that we will be able to transfer or to have XC USDC bridge from the EVM to Moonbeam to Centrifuge, and basically provide liquidity for our pools on Centrifuge. Yeah, it's also on the table to support USDT and yeah, and we have to see. I mean, yeah, like as you said, like things happen very quickly on the space, and like yeah, So, but that's like the short-term plan.
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing here, I mean, talking about multi-chain sessions, right, is that you guys are going to be like, touching a lot of chains, in the ecosystem, right, to bring the liquidity. It's not only, if you think about the Axelar scenario that you mentioned, Nuno, that's like 4 chains if you consider Axelar to be a blockchain, right?
Yeah.
Which and so you're actually bridging over USDC through Axelar to Moonbeam, and then you're going to use XCM to bring those USDC into a pool inside Centrifuge. So I mean, I don't know if there's a more multi-chain example than that, I think.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny that you say that, like, because I've been working with XCM for a while now, and I completely forgot the complexity involved in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I think I joked with you one time that every time you start working on XCM for the first time, you get sick, like a cold, and
Yeah.
it's just like the topic is so complex that I think your defense is probably lower or something. But anyway,
Yeah,
cool. All right, so yeah, I think we can wrap it up with this last question, which is more high level, but just to give like the listeners a little bit of a taste of some real world use cases that we could see showing up in this sort of like real world how do you say, like bringing real world assets to Centrifuge, right? Has any sort of examples that you wanna provide?
I can hop in here. Yeah, I mean, a couple things that are already happening with Tin Lake. One of the simplest ones is, trade finance, which it's effectively, shippers only get paid once something arrives, but it might take 2 weeks for something to ship, right? So that, in this case, you're just advancing capital to the shippers and then collecting from the buyers, and you're financing those freight invoices. So you're essentially bridging that 2-week gap where someone's waiting to be paid but can't be paid yet. That's a simple one. There's new silver on Tin Lake, which does bridge loans or fix and flip loans. So that lets real estate investors finance both purchasing some old property, but also the construction itself. So these can be, it's like real estate, but usually shorter term loans that generally make it, an easier investment for a revolving pool, which is a pool that investors can enter and exit from before, the term of an investment ends. So things like that, Flow Carbon, which just launched, are financing carbon credits. And I believe the whole use case behind that is that often to get payout from a carbon credit, it can take up to 2 years or so. And they're effectively forwarding or advancing the payments for those, so people don't have to wait 2 years to get their money. And again, that's all possible with financing from the Centrifuge protocol and with liquidity from Centrifuge. In terms of use cases for people on Moonbeam, as we've alluded to previously, I think what's really exciting here is that people are going to be able to invest in these real-world assets, without dealing with bridging or, trying to navigate the user experience of a whole new chain. And I think as we've seen with all the market volatility, it can be really intriguing to some investors to get this uncorrelated source of yield, right? Real assets effectively, a bunch of fix and flip loans or trade invoices don't really care if Ethereum or Polkadot or Bitcoin are jumping up and down like crazy, right? Those businesses are very uncorrelated from crypto markets. So I really think that on chains like Moonbeam is going to be a huge use case for people to diversify their investments into real world assets. That's what I have in mind right now. And then Anna or Nuno, if you have any other things, feel free to jump in.
Before you go, Devin, I want to put you on the spot. I have a question. I'm not sure if this actually it's an interesting question, but is there any sort of use cases that you were not able to do before on Tinder Lake that you can do now that you're like a Polkadot Parachain?
Yeah, definitely. I would say I don't know if the core team is going after this, but it's something that I've always thought about, where just the fact that it's going to be cheaper and easier to create pools and spin them up, coupled with all the legal and credit infrastructure that people are working on behind the scenes, I think it's going to be a lot easier for small businesses to start taking advantage of this technology. So that effectively means, like let's say you're a small, medium enterprise that's doing something like harbor or coastal freight, where you have these shipping invoices. Previously, it might have to be an entity like that might have to be more selective as to whether they can use this technology, because spinning up a pool on Ethereum requires all this dev work. You have to pay all the gas fees to launch that. And now if we're on a parachain where everything's much cheaper and more scalable, I think there's a lot more opportunities for smaller players to get in here. But again, there's also, a lot of legal work and infrastructural work and credit work to be done to make that possible, which we're also working on.
Yeah, that's really cool, though. I mean, that's a really cool example, actually. Yeah, I didn't think about that. And now that you actually make, by moving to be your own, like, parachain, you're actually making it possible, right? Because there's a big if there, but, it's accessible to a lot more, like, people in the world. So that's really
definitely
cool.
And there's that, and there's also the fact that, I mean, we're aiming to build, decentralized protocol, right? And we want to move away from needing, 5 very knowledgeable Solidity engineers who understand the tech stack in and out, and we want to be able to, open this up to the world and create a decentralized infrastructure that, people maybe from outside the core team will learn how to use, will learn how to deploy on, et cetera, et cetera.
Go ahead, Anna.
I have also so what wasn't possible before, like coming back to the small businesses, I mean, they could in theory aggregate now and have one big asset originator, or one big, so we separate them in an issuer, that's the special purpose vehicle, so the legal setup that you need to do in order to open a pool. But in theory, you could have one legal entity, and then you have many different asset originators. So let's say we have like 10 small businesses that have the exact same assets in terms of, let's say, trade finance or factoring, and then they could all be under this one umbrella, and could in theory share the costs as well of setting up the SPV, and all receive the finance they need, the loans they need. And because now we're also able to do different tranching. Before we were only able to have like 2 tranches, a senior and a junior, a senior and a junior tranche, and now we can have up to 5 tranches. I mean, we need to make sure that it makes sense economically, but it's still possible to really adapt to different businesses and also their risks. And that's really cool, because that wasn't possible on Ethereum before, and now it's possible. So that's really cool.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. I think it was really interesting. I know that I learned a lot. Hopefully everyone in the audience learned as well. So yeah, I mean, I think we can wrap it up. So I want to thank Anna, Devin, and Nuno from Centrifuge for joining me today in this multi-chain sessions. I know that for you guys, this is for the listeners. This is over. We're going to keep working in the shadows to keep testing all these like multi-chain stuff, which I think we think it's part of the future. And I think the Centrifuge example is just one of the examples basically that shows you that this is something that actual teams are working on. And so yeah, thanks a lot for joining, everyone. Like I said before, my name is Alberto. I'm from the Moonbeam team, and yeah, we'll catch you in the next multi-chain session. So have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alberto.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.